In this report, I've got a textbook example of the most deeply entrenched new car dealer service department ripoff. And I'll tell you the countermeasures you must deploy if you want to avoid becoming this scam's next victim. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au, and I get new cars cheap. Australia only. Website. Card. I don't know about you, but I am emphatically sick of the car industry treating Australian consumer law as if it somehow doesn't apply to cars. Like it's only for toasters and fridges and things of that nature. Real life example coming up next. This video is sponsored by Olight. The Olight May sale is on tonight, Wednesday the 17th of May at 8 p.m. until Friday at midnight. I'll put links in the description. The highlights this month, the O-Pen Glow is on sale, 30% off. A significant upgrade here. It's a torch and a writing light and a laser pointer and also a pen, oddly enough. The Perrin 2 is on sale for 30% off, so you'll get it for under $90. Super versatile torch. It's a 90-degree torch, a head torch, a clip-on and a waterproof emergency work light. The Baton 3 Pro Max is a great EDC torch for under $100 right now. It's got a huge 5,000 milliamp hour battery, so you get long run times, 5 brightness settings, and it's also IPX8 waterproof. The Optical now for the EDC fraternity. Laser cut, titanium coated, credit card sized utility tool for about $7. Also good for holding a credit card, a driver's license, and a few bills of cash if you go out on a day walk. And finally, the Robato 2 O-Knife. Left and right hand compatible, it's got a rail lock, 154 chrome moly sheep's foot blade, very slick design overall, and it's under $100 right now. I don't want to detain you for too long here and now, so I've done a longer overview video of these Olights, which I will link somewhere up there when this one goes live if you need more information. I'll also put in the description my guide to buying an Olight because there is just frankly so much choice, and the right one kind of depends on you. I'll put that in the description as well. Links to the sale in the description too. It's on right now until Friday at midnight, and I'll put a code down there as well for 12% off outside the sale if you watch this video sometime in the future. And thanks very much to Olight for sponsoring this episode. So let us hear from a dude named Dave right now who reached out to me just the other day with a bee in his bonnet over the failure of a radiator in his... It's probably better if I purge. Volkswagen Polo GTI. It's 5.5 years old, okay? And it ended up at Crick's Volkswagen, an authorised dealer on the Sunshine Coast. Mighty Crick's rhymes with... It eludes me. Dave goes... Do you have a view, please, on the reasonable life expectancy of a car radiator where the car has been serviced according to the handbook and otherwise appropriately maintained? The reason for my question is the attached diagnosis and quote for a new radiator on my 2017 Volkswagen Polo GTI. It seems to me that a radiator should not reasonably be expected to fail after 5.5 years of average use with 92,000 kilometres on the odometer. I'm considering making a request to Volkswagen under the Australian consumer law to replace the radiator at their cost, as I don't believe the radiator is of acceptable quality for it to fail at its age. However, I am not an expert in the field, therefore was hoping for your thoughts. I had to pay the cost of the radiator on the day to the dealer, as they said it is their policy that all parts greater than $500 must be paid for before they order them from Sydney. So, this is the first time I've heard that a car dealer's policy trumps the requirements of Australian consumer law. Sex and travel on that one, dudes. This report is my honest personal opinion. No reference whatsoever to individuals is made. I'm talking exclusively about the conduct of corporations with more than 10 employees for profit. So there's that. That's very important to the lawyers. So here's the thing. I've seen the quote. Okay, here's how it goes. Radiator, $684. Like, they do see you coming, don't they? In what universe is that a reasonable price for a replacement radiator in a cheap shitbox car? Like, it's just not. Coolant, $83. Like, you couldn't just catch the coolant that was in it and reuse it and then change it at the service interval, could you? $83. Labour, $528. And this is the ultimate see you coming. Like, anatomy of a fraud. You know, if there was a billboard as big as you could imagine, the biggest billboard on earth, and it said anatomy of a fraud, these are all of the hallmarks, are they not? The extortionate cost of the parts, and $528 to unbolt a radiator and bolt a new one in and then fill it up. Like, really? Get to that. So I estimate that Rhymeswith, the dealer, is making about $350 on the radiator. That's just the supply of the radiator. Because how this works, they order a radiator from Volkswagen Australia, and then Volkswagen wholesales it to them, and then they mark it up. And I reckon they'd be marking it up with at least $350 worth of margin in it, okay? So there's $350 off the bat. And that's just for middlemaning it, or let's call it what it really is, middle douchebagging it. Okay, so $350 just for making an email order, getting the part in and telling you it's here. Great. Plus, they're probably charging, based on the price that they quoted, which was $528, I'm assuming that they're charging 4 hours at $132 an hour to do that job. And I just look at that and I go, you know, shoot me in the head now, dude, because in what universe does it take a proper mechanic 4 hours to unbolt a radiator and bolt one back on? Plus, they're probably paying some minimum wage dude no more than $32 an hour, and the dealership is pocketing $100 an hour just to do the job. So there's that. And there's no way this takes 4 hours. Like, you're kidding, okay? So that's another $400 worth of profit, which is $750 worth of margin in the job. And I know dealers have costs. They've got systems to maintain and they've got support personnel to employ and things of that nature. I'm not saying it's all profit. It's not all going to put the dealer principal's kids through private school, but a lot of this is just extortion. There's no other word for it. It's a complete rip-off, and that's without considering Australian consumer law. This is like if you drive through a flock of pelicans at 100 k's an hour and feed one to the radiator. It's still a rip-off at $1,300. Like, it just is. And if they reuse the coolant, like, it is pretty easy to pull the bottom radiator hose off a radiator and just catch the coolant in a reservoir and reuse it if it's still serviceable. And how would you guarantee they're not doing that and just charging you $83 for new coolant, which is really just the old stuff reused, or most of the old stuff and a top-up? More than $800 worth of margin. Got to be kidding. This car's only worth 20 grand now. So, if it's a consumer law job, here's how this works. Volkswagen just loses the cost of the radiator. This is head office, okay? They supply the part under consumer law and they have to wear that as a loss, which is probably, to them, ordering it from Wolfsburg or something, it's probably about $300. So they lose $300 if it's a consumer law job. And then they pay Rhymeswith something like $60 an hour to do the work. So Rhymeswith probably makes $60 an hour for 2 hours versus $132 an hour for 4 hours if they can convince you it's not a consumer law job. So there's rather a big difference in the margin if they can convince you that this is not a consumer law job. And this is what they do. And I'm not saying it's just Rhymeswith, and I'm not saying it's just those criminals at Volkswagen. no reference to individuals is made. I'm talking about the US Department of Justice determination that they are the most fraudulent car company this century. There's a release on that, you can look it up. They're guilty of multiple felony counts. It's quite entertaining. Anyway, so Rhymes With is just going to make $60 after they pay their mechanic. And they're not going to make any margin on the radiator because that's just going to be supplied if it's a consumer law job versus, so this is $60 worth of margin if they do the job for Volkswagen under consumer law versus $800 worth of margin if they convince you that it's just a retail repair, okay? And if you multiply that by, I don't know, let's just for shits and giggles say 20 times that sort of thing happens a week in the service department, times 50 weeks a year is roughly 1,000 jobs. So the difference in margin is $740 in this case. And if we said that was average, we're talking about $750,000 worth of additional margin on the bottom line for one retail business every year. And all they've got to do to you is convince you that this is not a consumer law job. And I'd suggest that they do a whole bunch of things in the background to make it very difficult for you not just to follow the bouncy ball and go along with their script. It's very difficult for you to advocate. Part one, there's an imbalance of power, is there not? Because you've got a car and it's fucked and you need it unfucked, so they've got you over a barrel like that. And part two, they're going to put it on Volkswagen. Rhymes With is going to put it on Volkswagen. You know, it's like, oh no, they said it was, right? That'll be the full rate. And all of a sudden, you can't take this up with the entity responsible for denying your claim, which kind of sucks. And for most people, you know, $1,300 is like, do I really want to go to war for $1,300? Is it worth it? Like, what's the opportunity cost of going to war for this, right? So there's that as well. But if businesses like this continue to get away with this kind of misrepresentation of your entitlement to consumer law at the retail coalface of the service department, then this is just a monstrous cumulative rip-off of the Australian motorist. It just is. And isn't it just a pity that the ACCC is functionally unconscious 7.5 days a week? That was a backhander, by the way. So what consumer law actually says here is that the warranty status of your car is irrelevant. What matters is the acceptable quality consumer guarantee, and the acceptable quality consumer guarantee just says, among other things, that the car has to be reasonably durable. And the legislation is written that way because it applies to frickin' clutch pencils, right? And cars and everything in between. And reasonable durability for a clutch pencil is somewhat different to reasonable durability for a car because one costs a lot more than the other and it's used in a different way and different factors apply, okay? But for a car, you'd have to say that reasonable durability exists for about 10 years and about 160,000 kilometres. Maybe it's 8 years and 160, who knows? But it's not 5 years, that's for sure. It's not 5.5. You've got to be kidding. And radiators are not the kinds of devices that wear out unless you feed it a Pelican or, you know, you drive into a truck that's losing a load of bricks at the time at 100 k's an hour on the freeway or even freaking 80, okay? A radiator doesn't wear out. It's not like brakes or dampers or tyres or globes or things of that nature. A radiator just sits there, does the same job every day, exchanges heat. And when you read the quote, this is a failure of the bond between one of the tanks and the core. And I'm not going to put the quote up there because there's too much of Davo's personal information on the quote, and most of it would therefore appear to be redacted. But that's what the failure is. It's a failure of the adhesion between the tank and the core of the radiator, and they're just replacing it, okay? The problem here is this systematic collusion between car makers and their dealers. Dealers are very happy to put the determination of whether or not you're entitled to a fair shake under consumer law. They're happy to put that off on the parent car maker because they're over the horizon, right? And therefore, it's not the dealer's responsibility that they've said, get fucked, it's going to be the full fee. That's on the car maker. And hey, we're just here trying to solve your problem kind of thing, right? But both of these parties are highly incentivized to deny consumer law claims because then it becomes profitable for them. And in the case of car dealers, it becomes monstrously profitable, especially in an environment where half of car dealers can't deliver any cars next month because of all the shortfalls. This means that the business of a dealership is highly reliant on the cash flow from the service department, and there is a lot of pressure on service departments, the managers of service departments, etc., just to make a whole bunch more money for the dealership. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to railroad you into believing that you're not entitled to a result under consumer law. So my answer to Dave is, dude, radiators don't wear out. Not in that sort of time frame. They just don't. They're not subject to wear and tear. If you drive into something and break the radiator, then that's on you. But if all you do is drive normally in the way that a normal consumer would drive the car, and you get it serviced on time so that the coolant gets replaced at regular intervals, and let's not forget, coolant is the biggest misnomer in automotive history. It's up there with shock absorber, right? The coolant in your radiator does not really do much for the cooling, right? The main ingredient that's responsible for cooling is water. The main functions of coolant, the red or the green stuff, is to raise and lower the boiling point and freezing point respectively of the water that's doing the heat exchanging, and also to function as an anti-corrosive agent for the radiator and the engine, okay, because there's a few dissimilar metals in electrolytic contact. So if you get the coolant replaced at the service schedule intervals, then the radiator and all the other parts of the engine should be effectively protected against corrosion, and there shouldn't be a failure due to neglect, is what I'm saying. And then all you're doing is driving. So if there is a defect in the bond between the tank and the core, or some other defect with the radiator, that's on the car maker, because the legislation says the car has to be reasonably durable. And the only reason this falls over is because the ACCC has got no balls, and it's unconscious. And in that situation, no balls, unconscious, it's very difficult to stick up for the little guy, is it not? Okay, so here's the bottom line, right? This is $1,300 for a basic repair that probably took 2 hours and not 4, and the car's only worth 20 grand or something today. So that's about 7% of its value. And when you look at Volkswagen in particular, from the top down, they're criminals. That's just a fact. That is an objective determination of the US Department of Justice. And they were guilty of fraud. So what are we going to do? Trust them to do the right thing? And from the bottom up, dealers are just incentivized financially. There's a huge incentive to keep denying legitimate consumer law claims. So I would front up at the dealership and say, hey, I'm not paying you for this. This is a consumer law job. You've got to be kidding. This is the countermeasures, and you've got to use the buzzwords. You've got to say acceptable quality consumer guarantee, reasonable durability. You've got to tell the service advisor that you understand how the law works, and you've got to stick up for yourself, because nobody else in that environment will. And if they tell you to go to buggery and you say to yourself, well, that'll be $1,300 and it's really not worth fighting, and I suppose I'm between a rock and a hard place with a 5.5-year-old car, I'd just go to an independent radiator specialist and get the job fixed for half the price. But I would make absolutely sure that everybody it rhymes with knows that you are not dealing with them ever again. Like, you are going to source your servicing business elsewhere and you will never buy a new car from them again, because this is the only kind of thing that they listen to. And you should also make a formal complaint to the ACCC alleging misconduct, like misleading and deceptive conduct is a serious allegation, and the ACCC is tasked with investigating this kind of shit, okay? And even though ain't got none and all they do is punch out Z's, the dealership should be suitably concerned that you are going to complain to the ACCC about them, because the ACCC will not run out. They won't deploy a Black Hawk with a whole bunch of dudes in Nomex to come and abseil into your garage and help you. That's not how they roll. They don't act for individuals, but they do investigate misconduct, and if there's enough allegations of misconduct, then they do go eventually and get missile lock on particular businesses. And if I was one of those, that would suck. If the ACCC descends upon you, wakes up miraculously, grows a pair and descends upon you, then that's unfortunate, and it puts a hole in the rest of your day. And even the threat of that sort of complaint, if it's worded the right way. And the ACCC's actually got a demand letter creation tool on its website that you can use to draft a suitable letter of demand to a particular business to demand a resolution under Australian consumer law. So this kind of shit just has to stop, in my view. This is only my personal opinion about this particular situation, which I see parallel instances of every week. Like, I get these plaintive cries for assistance. It's like, you know, a torrent at times of what can I do, and can you get back to me, and can you help me? And I never say to anyone, dude, I'll help you with this. I'm too busy doing what I do, right? But people reach out to me with this shit all the time, and it really does concern me that a whole industry, or at least a significant chunk of a whole industry, seems to behave in this way. And on the balance of probability, I'd suggest that this instance is just one of those cases where consumer law says, fix it free, dickheads. And a bunch of dickheads, no reference to individuals is made, but a bunch of dickheads is going, nah, we're going to charge a full freight and see if we get away with it because good for us. And it really shouldn't be this way.